Go ahead and make yourself comfortable. Good morning. Good morning, Heidi's cat. Good to see you all. Namaste. Welcome. Take a moment in any kind of seat that you're in, and you can bring your hands, one on the heart, one on the belly, or bring them into your heart in prayer. And use it as an opportunity to just drop in, to find yourself in this moment, to scan, to notice, to feel all that you feel. And if there's any place in particular that is taking your attention, whether that's because it feels a little less than what you would want it to feel like, you can send some breath to that spot, fill it up with breath, fill it up with your attention, and then exhale it away. Perhaps if there's a spot that feels particularly good, you can put your attention there and ask that sensation to spread, to move out, to take up more space. But whatever you sense, whatever you feel, whatever you notice, do so without judgment, without an immediate need to change or fix or adjust. Just know what it is. Take note. Exhale. And then let your expression soften. Let your jaw hinge, loosen. Find some connection with the surface of your tongue to the hard palate of your mouth. Let your breath drop all the way down into your abdomen. And then do that one more time for the sound of Om. And then you can let your hands drop away. And then we're going to start standing today, and you'll need your block for that. So come on up to stand, and you'll want your block to be on its flat surface, on its lowest level. And just set yourself up standing behind it. And bring the ball mound of one foot up onto the block. So there's a little bit of distance between your support leg. And then just drop your heel and lean some body weight into the block. And then trade sides. Step back, bring the other foot up. So you catch the back edge, the back corner. You lean in, let your toes soften, and apply some pressure. And you're just going to move from side to side that way. So you're not trying to achieve anything big. Can you see that, Josie? Something go? Working on that angle in your ankle, giving some more length to the sole of your foot, and stepping in and out, seeing if you can achieve some more space. So it really is a body weight experience. And by moving from side to side rather than only being static, there's a benefit to both, but moving foot to foot and just tasting, you might find that you get little bits of extra room with each step. able to get a little bit into the arch muscles of your foot each time so that the angle that you're creating at that front side of your ankle gets smaller and smaller over time. Just moving into it. And there's probably a difference between the 2 feet. Very often you'll feel, or maybe give too much attention to the baby toe or the big toe mound side of your foot. So see if you can really feel like you're hooking the baby toe mound in there as well. Right? There's more soft tissue behind the big toe mound, so it's nicer to press in there. But see if you can get into that space where the 2 ball mounds hook. And then as you're finding a rhythm with it, and as you're finding your space with it, notice where you tend to look, where your gaze tends to go, and see if you can migrate your gaze away from the floor. Right? You might have to just peek and make sure that you're stepping to the place that you want to step, but then bring your gaze back up so that you don't get stuck into this slightly hunched or rounded way of moving. So you can put your body weight into it, but stay very upright. Even aim the actual spot that you're trying to get to the block higher, lower perhaps, if you want to think about it. So you can aim more into the arch space rather than the bony space and see if you can get into there, right? And it'll feel different. So if you have issues with your plantar fascia, be nice, be gentle. If you have neuromas, you might just touch without putting the body weight in. Finding what you can find and giving what's there a little bit more space. Just moving in and out of it. It's not going to be all feet in this practice, but we are starting at your feet. And then the next time that you get back to your first foot, pause. So you can just hang on that edge. And maybe there's body weight that you're pressing. Maybe you just focus on finding more space down the backside of your calf. So it might be that you're standing very vertical and stacking right over the top of your support leg. So in this case, my left foot, where you might hinge a little bit so you get that space and you also wake up the possibility in the fascia. You kind of pin the fascia. So you shut down the flow of fluid in there and know that when you release it, there's a flood that comes back. Good. And then other foot. So you can just find the angle, find the length down the back of your leg. So you open up through some of the calf, through some of your Achilles, down through the sole of your foot. Or you might apply a little pressure there. And direct that pressure from the foot that's not on the block. So press into it, get taller, and then it's almost like you're leaning into a particularly interesting conversation. Good. And then release that and just stand on your 2 feet for a moment and feel what you feel. Notice the spaces between your toes. Notice if there's a difference from when you first stood. And then you can move your block off your mat and find your ball. So I mentioned a sock only because sometimes the balls get away, right? They roll away. So if you tend to have a problem keeping track of where your ball is, you can put your ball in a sock and it won't roll away. Right? Ball down on the mat. And then with your heel on the floor, so you have this slightly sort of stutter step, think about the knuckles of your toes and roll the undersurface of the knuckles. So across the sole surface of your knuckles. And you're just waving that side to side. And once you get there, you can, again, take your gaze and watch the trees out your window, look past the screen. and just articulate. But notice if you tend to either grip your toes down around the ball or flare your toes dramatically off the ball. And you'll probably have to make little adjustments of where the ball is from time to time. So you're staying behind that bony articulation of your toes rather than getting into the arch surface just yet, right? And that's more sensitive, that spot behind the toes. So don't force your body weight into it, but see what's possible. You know, if you tend to, or if for any part of your life you wore a lot of shoes that narrowed at the toes, whether that's running shoes or anything else that narrowed a lot at your toes, it shuts down some of the articulation that you might naturally have in that space. And then switch to the other foot. Did the ball get away, Heidi? And it's a little, there's almost like a little hip movement in there. It's not quite doing the twist, but it's almost like a cha-cha. And if you allow yourself to feel some of that, then you're less likely to be holding tension in other parts of your body, right? Yeah, and a little bit of hip movement's always nice anyway. There's something very Sophia Loren about it in my mind. And you might notice that the articulation is different on the two sides. I certainly do, right? The different space possibilities. How your toes want to grip or not grip, right? But just working in the space that you've got and then seeing what new spaces come from working in that space. Every now and again, I get a nice little pop or crack in a joint that you didn't even know could pop or crack. Good, and then switch back to your first foot. And then without having your heel or your toes on the floor. So if your balance feels tricky here, you could always put your hand on something. But then you're just rolling kind of down the center line of your foot. So from the underside of your toes back toward the back edge of your arch. So not quite into the heel pad. And just focusing on that center line like you're kneading something, rolling something other than a ball, right? And just moving down that center line. And that might turn into a little bit of a circling through that space, finding a spot that feels interesting, leaning in a little bit. You can turn your toes out to the side as you go through that center line of your foot, finding what works and allows you to get into that space. And then again, check how you stand, check your posture, check how you are, right? Right, whenever you add some extra piece of something, like a ball here, your center of gravity is playing and finding where it wants to be, right? So see how you behave when your center of gravity is challenged by something being there that's not usually there. And then switch over to your other foot. Roll, roll, roll. If there are spots that are sensitive or pinchy or simply uncomfortable, roll gently. You can modulate how much pressure you put into the ball by how much you lean your weight. So that means you have to work more on the leg that is supporting you. You can keep it pretty soft. You can keep it pretty friendly, depending on what you need on any particular day or on the different side. And working that light touch is is beneficial, right? Doesn't need to be deep, right? When we're thinking about the fascia, there's layers of fascia throughout the body, all right? And that is benefiting from a layers of fascia, but it's all interwoven just as for some reason I went away, but I'm back. Now train, so you should be on your first foot again now and go to the arch, the instep, right? So the inner edge. So the difference when you get to that instep side is you kind of have to knock knee in a little bit. So I've got the ball underneath my right foot here, but my right knee knocks into the center. So I've got this internal roll of my femur. So I can really get to the instep. Yes, Barb, that's a special spot, right? Right? Because then you're getting closer to the bone, right? There's not as much soft surface when you're working that instep side. You can even get a little bit of the outer heel. Right? And what I notice when I'm working the instep side is, well, that feels interesting, but the leg that's supporting me has to work a lot more, right? So you turn on the support structure over there. A little bit goes a long way in the instep, so just a little bit more. Good. And then to the other foot, work the instep. Internet's being buggy, but I'm still here. So when you're working the instep, you're turning on your hip muscles. And so we're going to get there at some point too, okay? Last little bit of rolling. Good. And then stand on your 2 feet and simply feel what you feel from the two sides, right? So notice if you feel different on your 2 feet. I do, right? There's a little bit of heat spreading, especially on the instep side where you just were working. So enjoy that sensation. Pause in it. And then start to make your way down to all fours. Feel free to pad your knees, add what you need. We won't be on your knees for a very long time, but we will be here for a little bit. You can have fists or you can have palms down. Have your toes curled under. And then just begin to rock back and forth some. So you're working on a toe spread. It's not a bounce, but there is some recoil or reflexive response that moves you back to that place where your shoulders go over your wrists. And you're just moving through your big toe and finding some space there. You've opened up the soles of your feet quite a bit already. So hopefully there's not too much resistance in that spot, but only move as deep as you need to go. Where's your gaze, right? So see if you can move your gaze forward toward what would be the horizon or the screen, right? So that you're also working actively on stabilizing your spine and creating a responsive posture there by gazing out in front. Notice if your heels tend to click together or splay apart. You don't really have to do a lot of change in that, but do notice what your tendency or your habit might be. Good. And then just a little bit more this way. And then you can point your toes for a moment and just set some weight back into the top of your foot. Doesn't have to be your full weight. Maybe your hips drop to your heels, but not required. Yeah. Good. And then start in that all fours again and step your right foot. So it might be that your right heel is in line with your left knee, might be that your right toes are in line with your knee, or it might be somewhere further forward. But find a spot where you can comfortably set your foot. It's definitely not as far forward as your hand. And then rock your weight back some, rock your weight forward some. When you rock your weight back, your foot's completely flat. When you rock your weight forward, your heel comes up. And you're working that articulation through your entire foot. You could choose to have your back toes curled under so you still have that rocking into your toes. And you might find that along the way you can drop your knee forward by your wrist so you get a fuller articulation in those toes. The movement's called a Lego rock, right? So it comes from sitting and playing with children with Legos and then rocking forward out of that seat. I did not create the name, but I happily share it with you. Because you're sitting back into your hip, you get to start working on some of that tension that might have been created when you were standing with most of your weight in one leg to roll the ball. Still see if your gaze can stay forward mostly. So even when you're going back, Josie, keep your eyes forward. So even when you're rocking back, yeah. The way that a cat prepares to jump onto a surface and they're kind of judging where that surface is and how much effort to put into their movement. A little bit more here. Good. And then all fours again. And then just trade sides. So your other foot can step forward a little bit, whether that's your toes in line with your knee, your arch, heel. Find a spot. And then just begin to rock. Test the waters. As one of my teachers says, taste test it. Moving in and out of it. Eventually, remembering that you're aiming your knee to drop toward the ground. Moving to build the range of motion. Moving to hydrate through the connective tissue. Noticing the difference in the two sides. how your hip might wing out on the way back on this side. It happens for me anyway. Whether that's because of a soft tissue difference or a bony difference. Moving with a sense of curiosity through those spots. Keeping your gaze forward, just like when you first learned how to move. Good. Last little bit here. Good. And then settle to all fours. You can lay your toes out behind you if you had them curled for the support foot, and just let some weight drop back briefly, short moment. Good. And then one last moment here on all fours. I'm going to turn my back to you just for a moment so you can see my feet, but I'm going to work the angle. So I'm going to take my right foot and I'm going to turn it inward, right? So rather than letting it sickle out, I'm going to turn it inward. And I'm going to think about that inward shape, and I'm going to use my opposite foot to encourage it. So adding a little bit of weight and pressing back, and then leaving that, and then pressing back and leaving it. And I can kind of watch that as I press back, right? So I have this angle to the inside and a little bit of rocking with that. So if you've had knee replacements, for instance, you might take this a little bit smaller. If you have meniscus issues, you might just pay attention to how you guard and how you protect, right? And you're on that one side first, and you're just kind of pinning your foot back to the midline. And you're reminding yourself that your joints move in lots of directions, even in the directions that you don't often think about them moving, but they move in lots of directions. But they certainly don't move in lots of directions when they don't move in lots of directions. You know what I mean? To go someplace, they have to go someplace. And if they never go someplace, they can't go to that place. You're not moving through any kind of pain or major discomfort, but you might be moving through unfamiliar territory. A little bit more with your first foot. Good. And then switch to your second foot. And whenever I do this, I'm reminded of childhood friend Seth Thompson, right? Who used to always sit in this sort of like frog, what we think of as like a virasana seat, but with his feet turned. So his heels were in and he was on the pinky edges of his feet. And even as a little kid, I was like, how do your ankles move like that? But it was how he sat, and it was just so natural for him. And about 10 years ago, I mentioned it to him, or I forget if it was in person or virtually. And I said, remember how you used to sit and you used to sit with your feet turned out and back on your heels? And he goes, yeah, I wish I could still do that. Right? And we all can, or we could work toward it, right? So much of what we think about as being available to us in childhood, it seems like, oh, well, I could do that when I was young. And yeah, there are bony changes that happen to us along the way, but mainly it's because we stopped doing whatever we were doing, right? We stopped moving in a particular way. We were told to stop sitting in a particular way, or we started sitting in chairs all the time, or wearing hard shoes all the time, right? And so we lost the access. It doesn't mean it's gone completely. It might mean that it takes work to get it back. Last couple of movements here. Good. And then release. And you're going to make your way down onto your back. Please have your ball handy. And start with the soles of your feet down to the mat. I'm going to put the ball in my right hand to start. And just land for a moment so you feel what's happening in your two hips, your two sides. And then when you lift up, place the ball underneath your right butt cheek, but get close to the sacrum. So get close to the bony side of things. You might even start on a little edge of bone, and then let your hips move a little bit to the left until you're in the muscle. So you're close to the bone, but no longer really on the bone. And you're high enough in that muscle that you feel like you're at the top edge of your pelvis rather than somewhere low and deep. So you're really at the top end of your glute max. And then you can just find a spot where you can sink in into the muscle, sink the muscle into the ball, and breathe. You might feel like a wave of like a little ripple through the muscle sometimes, where there's a release and things let go, they flutter out. And then you can move that a little bit more laterally toward the outer edge, staying in this higher end of things, and sink again. Think about a tube of toothpaste, right? And if where your sacrum is the base of the toothpaste tube, you're easing away from the bone toward the outer edge of your pelvis. Find one more spot where you can just move a little bit laterally and sink, sending tension away from your midline across the glute. Okay, and then feel like you can go a little bit lower, like maybe a centimeter lower in the muscle, so it's a little bit thicker, a little bit more meat. And then have this micro cat and cow so that you allow your back to soften, your belly to soften, your ribs to come forward some, and then you curl in. And while you're moving that way, you might move slightly on the ball, it might shift to different places, but you stay in this general vicinity of your meaty, thicker middle glute maximus. Adjust as you need along the way. And you can synchronize this mini cat cow with your breath, right? So that when you're exhaling, you're curling in. When you're breathing in, you're softening. Good. And then see if you can take it just a little bit lower. You might have to use your hand to find that slightly lower spot in the thick part of your glute. And then imagine maybe doing a little bit of a hula hoop action with your hip or a hula dance. So you circle the muscle on the ball. And you're ending up moving a little bit lower in this progression. Right? You don't want to get down to the boniest part of what is that upper edge behind your sitting bone, but you're moving in that direction. So moving out of the meaty glute toward the lower side of that and getting close to your piriformis now. So when you feel like you hit that bony ridge on what is the backside of what becomes your sitting bone, pause there. And then open your right knee out to the right and then close it up, right? So opening and closing your hip, using your external hip flexors, turning them on while the ball is pinning them in place. And then noticing where tension shows up, whether that's your neck or your fingers, your face, your low back guarding, playing in this opening and closing. And then the next time that your thigh is open, pause. So you might be more aware of the bone. So that might mean that you just close a smidge, or you breathe into that, or you let your body sink slightly differently. So you can be at that line of your piriformis while it's engaging, while it's shortening, then applying some pressure to it there. A couple more full breaths toward your belly. Good, and then close your hip. Remove the ball, set down your hips. Feel the difference between the two sides. Should feel pretty different. The side that you were just working in might feel different temperature, maybe warmer. The side that you haven't worked yet might feel like Play-Doh before you've started to manipulate it with your hands. And then go underneath the second side. So you can place the ball close to the bony surface of your sacrum as a starting place, high up toward the top of your pelvis. And then as you settle, let your pelvis move a little bit to the right so you settle into the muscle. And just be there, sinking in. Notice if your breath got shallow as you sunk in. That might be your spot, or you might just migrate a little bit outside laterally, finding a different spot to sink. Ask yourself if you're really releasing. And then you might find one more roll laterally. And then you can begin that micro cat and cow. Boy, does this side feel different. So you have this movement that goes higher and lower through the muscle. Plucking over the fibers of the muscle. Notice that you might be moving into a meatier territory of the bum. And you can let that happen. You can help that happen. So then you can start to experiment with that sense of circle. Hip circles on the ball. And we're staying off the bone, really working through these thicker places of muscle. Feel free to reverse the circle. And as you migrate lower, find that spot where you're close to what feels like the back of what will become your sitting bone. And then open your left thigh and close it. In and out of that. Turning on your piriformis, turning off your piriformis. You're not only turning on the piriformis, there's other external rotators that are at play there. The piriformis tends to be the one that a lot of us are most familiar with in a yoga context. And it's the one that tends to get angry, right? Some people call it yoga butt. You get that sort of angriness. It's the one that, if you ever have problems with your sciatic nerve, it will very often start with this muscle of piriformis. When piriformis gets kind of gnarled and tightened up, it puts a lot of pressure on your sciatic nerve. And then the next time that your leg is open, stay there. Let some body weight sink. You decide how much sinks. Notice your breath in particular. Slow it down, give it room. Stay for a few more breaths. See where you hold. See if you can let go. Go one more moment. And then close up your hip. Take away the ball. Set down your hips and notice the difference. Notice what the two sides feel like. Hopefully they match a little bit more. They may never match 100%. Good. And then why don't you roll to your side for a moment, come up to sit, and just take a look at the screen. And then I'm going to take my thumb right into the base of my skull. There's a little bit of a bony ridge there at the base of the occiput. And then I'm just going to go across the base of there. And it kind of feels like a bit of a C shape or the bottom of a U. And if I go down my neck and go from the neck up to that spot, there's some ridge, and then you hit the ridge, and you can go right up to that ridge with your thumbs. You can do it on both sides and just sort of go up that. So that's the ridge that I'm talking about. And you could always just sit and do this. But this ridge right at the base of your skull, when you apply pressure there, it's called, it's one of the calm the spirit points. It can be very calming. Okay, so I'm going to use the block as a pillow, and you can keep watching for a moment here. So when the block is under my skull as a pillow, I feel like that flat bone of the occiput is flat on the block. Then there's this ridge of block that is very close to that ridge that you were just palpating on the back of your skull. All right, so this corner, not a flat part, but the corner of that block, I'm going to tilt it so that I get into a place where this ridge, so it's not flat, the flat part is not touching my neck, that's against that ridge where I can rest, like a little head prop. Right? So that may or may not feel stable. You can always hold on to the sides of the block when you're doing that and let your head rest on it. You're not going to be moving around, so find a spot that you can be in and then let yourself be there. And you can leave it sooner than my words at any point, of course, but find your way. So start with your head on a block pillow. You can go up the back of your neck toward that ridge and then find the ridge of block that's close to that. Angle that ridge up, so that will take your chin in the direction of your chest. But if you take your fingers and just touch the back of your neck, there should be some space between your neck and the flat surface of the block. If you have hair that kind of dangles or drapes over the block, you could always brush your hair back beyond the pillow of the block before you start to move. Especially, it can make it a little bit slippery, right? And I'll be honest, I don't remember what it's like to do a lot of these things with hair because I haven't had, hair on my head in any kind of meaningful way for a long time now. Find a place where you can sink in and you can think about that idea of calming the spirit. It's a spot that if you get tension headaches, massaging the way that we were doing with your thumbs a couple of moments ago can be really helpful. Can be nice for some people before sleep at night, especially if you struggle with sleep. But for those of us who get things like migraines, where the trigger is sometimes mysterious, you know, go with what you sense and what you feel, right? For me, I know that if I'm going to get a migraine, I know when it's coming. Like I can sense it, right? If I've done something that's going to trigger it, I know that. So if you sense those things at any point, back away, right? Go back to a gentle massage, a gentle palpation of that spot. I'm only going to stay here for a few more breaths. Because just because it's called calm the spirit doesn't necessarily mean that it will be calming to your particular spirit. So also acknowledge that, and maybe you come back to it another time, you check it out again. Stay for one more breath. And then you can take your hands to the block and slowly flatten it down. Keep your head elevated for a moment so you land on the bony surface of your skull. Take a full breath in and let it go completely. And then you can peel that block out from underneath your skull. You can roll to your side to find your ball, socked or unsocked. And apropos what I was saying, I've got 3 different balls here. 2 are about the same size, but one is quite hard. It's a lacrosse ball. The other is a bit more squishy. It's a kind of like not quite like a super ball consistency, but squishier than that. It's soft. It's more porous. And then I've got a larger one, which is, a nice size difference. And if you are sensitive in these spots, a larger ball can sometimes be nice because it's less surface area, doesn't go as deep into the tissue, or just a softer ball that's the same size. So you can always play around with your thicknesses, your diameters, and your consistencies. So find that same little divot point that you started on with your thumb, and then you can just prop on that. And then you're going to work one side at a time. So from that center point out toward one ear. So if I want to go to the right side with the ball, I have to turn my head to the right. So I kind of massage that back ridge. And then I can move through that soft tissue space. There's rotation. As you move through the soft tissue. It's slow, so it doesn't ever feel like you're going to roll off. A little bit more. And then the next time that you're in that central divot, pause. And then start to explore the other ridge. the other side of the ridge. As you have to play with the placement of the ball as you get used to the side that you're on. It may be tender, so be nice, especially if you have a lot of computer sitting in your day. Stay with this side a little bit longer. Good. Pause and then take the ball out, move them off to the side. Just be on your back for a moment. Notice what you notice around your neck, around your skull, right? And think about the sensation in the soles of your feet, behind your pelvis, base of your skull. And then in your mind's eye, connect all of that. So see how the soles of your feet connect to the back of your pelvis and how the back of your pelvis connects to the back of your skull. And know that the whole chain from your soles all the way up over the top of your skull surface is one long chain of fascia, one long fascial network. Giving space to one gives space to the others. Giving space to those three sections gives space to all the sections in between. And then you'll need your block and you'll need your strap, right? So it might be, and it just kind of depends on you, that you can start with the block on the floor next to you, and then you'll open up your strap. And then you can draw in your knees and loop your feet. So just not making a loop with the strap or anything, but stick your feet into the strap and extend your legs up to the ceiling. So you just want to get this vertical orientation through your legs. And you want to move your hands, maybe in line with your calf muscles, and then soften your elbows so that the natural heaviness of your arms kind of helps keep your legs in this orientation. And then feel what you feel whatever resistance is there. And then you might tick-tock a little bit across your pelvis. Not trying to force your hamstrings to do anything that they don't, so there could be some bend to your knees. Right? We didn't do anything really for your hamstrings in particular. But when you work your soles, when you work the posterior side of your pelvis, and the base of your skull, you might find that your hamstrings do release a little bit. Part of the same network. You can make some circles now that start with your pelvis that goes all the way up to your feet. So don't feel as though you're directing it with your hands, but feel how your hands go along with what's going on in the circles of your legs. You might feel like you're still giving a gentle massage across the back of your sacrum or the framing bones of your sacrum, the PSIS. You can pause and let your legs come closer to you, and then they move away from you a little bit. So closing the angle, opening the angle. Gives a little massage to your low back. Good. And then you might decide, depending on what you're using there. For me, my feet will keep the strap in place, and I can just slip the block down by my bum and bring my legs in close enough that I can slip the block underneath my sacrum without undoing it all. But you might find that it's less of a circus act to come down, put the block underneath, and then reset. And then once the block is in place under your sacrum, you just want to make sure you don't feel it underneath your spine. So flat pelvis parts to flat block, holding onto the strap. And you can be static here, or you can experience and play with some of those circles or those side to sides again while you're on the block. Because you've elevated your hips a little bit, it goes more into inversion territory. Explore what you need. So you let your body's intuition speak to you, right? The intuitive intelligence of your body. Let it speak to you a little bit and let it guide how you engage, how you move. And then find a place to pause. And maybe you keep your hands on your straps, or maybe you let your arms fall away to a T shape or a cactus shape. Maybe just down by your sides. Being here. Just a few more moments. And then you can take your hands to your straps and bend your knees, free a foot, free the other foot. You're still propped on your block as your feet come down, landing in this little supported bridge. And you can move through that idea of a micro cat-cow a couple times here, just moving through the tilt of your pelvis, freeing anything that got stuck. Good. And then press into your feet, lift your hips high enough off the block to move the block out to the side. Land your hips to the floor again. And then pick up your feet so your knees are roughly 90 degrees. You can grip behind your knee crease so your palms wrap underneath the crease of your knee. I just feel how that changes perhaps the shape of your back from where it was when your feet were flat. Lift your head and shoulders a little bit off the floor, and then let your feet get heavy toward the foot end of your mat so there's some roundness to your back, and then just rock gently through that. So you're in this little basket shape in your body, And you can massage thinking about your spine, but if you lean a little bit to one side, you get more of the muscle outside your spine. Other side. You can pick up a little momentum if you like. The rock might get a little bigger. Stimulating your skin all the way down to the bone. Try not to smack your sacrum or your skull against the floor. Rocking just a little bit more. If the rocking doesn't work, don't force it. And the next time that you're rocking forward, rock yourself all the way up to sit. Let your legs stretch out long in front of you. And you might lay your block, or if you have a bolster handy or anything else handy, you might lay your block across your shins or maybe across your thighs there, depending. But without worrying about that just yet, with your legs extended, go into a pretty dramatic flexion of your feet. So like you're trying to take your toes all the way to to the front of your shin bone. So really flexing and just seeing what's possible there, both in the sole of your foot, your Achilles tendon, and also in that lower side of your leg. So your calf muscle and the hamstrings that right at the top of the calf, where your hamstrings cross below your knee. You might touch the front of your shin bone and feel the muscle right there on that ridge of shin right through your anterior tibialis and feel how that's come to life. Keeping that dramatic flex, hinge just a little bit at your hips. So it might be that you just hinge and let your forearms rest on your thighs. Right? So continuing to lengthen through that lower portion of your leg. So if there's any strain behind your knees, then back off a little bit. Depending on you and your body, you might be able to get your elbows to your kneecaps while you keep this dramatic flex, or you can have something on your legs to bring your elbows onto and keep this dramatic flex. So feeling maybe even more space showing up through your soles, through the back side of your lower leg. Feeling some heat on the front side of my leg for sure. Good, and then soften that dramatic flex. So let your feet just relax to whatever is neutral. Hinge a bit more deeply so you could always lay your block down between your calves, between your knees. You could stack your hands on top of your block so that you fold. Maybe your forehead comes to your block. And then visualize whatever depth you're in, that the length is starting at the sole of your foot, traveling up the back of your lower leg, up the back surface of your upper leg, over your pelvis, up your back, over your shoulders and neck, all the way up, across the bony surface of your skull. That's the network. And sometimes visualizing that space from your soles to your skull, seeing its connection, whether you actually know the details of what it looks like or not, but knowing that that is the pathway, sometimes just visualizing it gives you a different access to the space. To divorce yourself a little bit from the idea that you're trying to stretch in this moment. Imagine breathing space into your connective tissue. Feel free to let your exhale have some sound. Give yourself a couple more exhales. And then you can, depending on how deep you are in the fold, you might place your hands on the floor next to your knees and thighs. Press and roll your shoulders back to lengthen your elbows to sit yourself up. And then eventually start to make your way down onto your back. Right? So give yourself whatever you need, whether that's a pair of socks or a blanket over your body. You can also rest on your belly if you prefer to rest face down. If you're close to a wall, feel free to put your legs up on the wall, another option. And setting yourself into the kind of rest that you need in this moment. And as you settle, you can notice what's the same, what's different from when you began. Noticing what's the same. Yeah? And being okay with either. Feel the natural heaviness behind your exhale. And let this be a moment in your day when you don't resist gravity. So much of our existence is spent resisting gravity just because we're upright. So let this be a moment where gravity can feel like a friend, like it can feel welcome. Let it support the experience of letting go. So the muscles of your face, hinge of your jaw, all that can go slack. All work can cease. so that you start to feel as though you're part of the floor, part of the ground. Where you're really getting to practice the final letting go. Begin to have an awareness of the space that you're in. Temperature, sound, light on the other side of your eyelids. And then your breath can expand in that awareness. And your body can expand in that awareness. You can stretch and wiggle. Move your toes, move your fingers. Bend your knees and make your way to a side. And pause on your side for a moment. And then use your hands to sit yourself up. You can bring your hands together at your heart or place them some other way. Let your chin drop in the direction of your heart. Expressing some internal gratitude for this time that you've given yourself, for this time that you've spent with each other. And breathe in. We are one life, we are one light, and we are one love. It's with gratitude that I bow, honoring the divine in each of you. Thanks for being here. Good to see you, Barb, and Heidi, and Josie, and Deborah, and Donna. Nice to see all of you. Enjoy the rest of your day on this glorious summer-like day, and see you soon.
Thank you.